was given fire. A torpedo was discharged. A number of seconds later, the order was again given fire. A weapon was discharged, and a number of seconds later, the order was again given fire, and a third weapon was discharged.
May the 2nd, 1982, the event which made inevitable an all-out shooting war over the Falklands, the sinking of the Argentine heavy cruiser Belgrano. Along with the ship went down any hope of peace with the military junta which had invaded the islands without warning 4 weeks earlier. Within 48 hours, the Argentinians retaliated. 20 men, the first British servicemen to be killed in the war, died aboard H.M.S. Sheffield. Over the next 6 weeks, 1,000 men from both sides were to die. At home, MPs were told that the Belgrano had been closing on our task force, leaving its commander no choice but to order a submarine attack. But later, a personal diary kept by an officer from the submarine Conqueror was leaked. It told a different story and has fueled the controversy over whether the sinking and the war was inevitable. Tonight, World in Action has the first interview with any officer from the submarine. Lieutenant Narendra Sethia is the author of the Conqueror diaries. Sethia left the Navy shortly after his submarine returned to England to set sail around the world in a small yacht. He stopped off in the West Indies, where he is today a director of a small yacht charter business. Last week, World in Action brought Mr. Sethia back to England to hear his account of the publication of his controversial diary and his view of the sinking of the Belgrano. It's a view which is very different from the one given in Parliament. On the 5th of April 1982, just 3 days after the invasion of the Falklands, the British task force set sail. As the crowds cheered the surface ships of the Royal Navy, few realised that the submarine fleet was already on its way. Lieutenant Sethia had served 8 years in the Navy and was a submarine supplies officer with other duties including keeping the captain's log. He also kept a personal diary.
2nd April 1982. Arrived on board at 08:15 to find that Argentina has invaded the Falklands and we're in the throes of storing for war. Everything seems to be happening.
What was the feeling on board the submarine as you went towards what was an unknown situation?
Excitement in some ways, because we were, in effect, storing for war and going to war. Apprehension, but in the early stages, certainly disbelief that anything would come of it. I think it was, apart from the fact that we sailed or started storing on April Fool's Day, there was the general belief that we may well be going on another one of these long patrols and would end up being away for a long time and returning home after having done nothing.
Doubt that there would be a war was reflected in the mood on board the submarine. During the dash south, Lieutenant Sethia came second equal with the submarine commander, Rayford Brown, in the beard-growing competition. And in a sponsored slim, the 124 men on board lost 2/3 of a ton between them, raising £1,000 for charity. In the last days of April, it looked as though their thoughts might prove correct. American Secretary of State Haig, having abandoned his own shuttle diplomacy, began less public talks with Peru about the chance of a last-minute ceasefire. Author and journalist Arthur Gavshon had detailed discussions with the main negotiators in researching his book on the substance of the Peruvian peace plan.
There were 7 precise points, and by the 1st of May, that's Saturday, 1st of May, the day before the Belgrano was attacked, there were pieces of paper and being exchanged, and the heads of government came into the picture on that night, Saturday night.
President Belaúnde Terry of Peru was negotiating on behalf of Argentina in the talks, and General Haig was putting the British viewpoint. The Peruvians believe that he was consulting London, but this has been consistently denied by Mrs. Thatcher.
The British and the Argentines were still in disagreement in the proposals over whether the wishes of the islanders ought to be taken into account in any final settlement, or the aspirations of the islanders should be considered.
They believed that they were within one word of a ceasefire.
That's correct.
It has been our strategy all along to build up...
Haig did discuss the plan with Foreign Secretary Francis Pym in Washington, who said the door to a diplomatic solution was still open. 5 days earlier, the fleet had been told something else.
25th April. We had a reassuring signal saying it looks as though the diplomatic pontificating is now over. Military intervention now seems inevitable. Feelings on board a mixture of excitement and apprehension.
On April the 30th, the British imposed a 200-mile total exclusion zone around the Falklands. Any foreign vessel inside it would be considered hostile. The only ship which would be sunk on sight was the Argentinian flagship 25 de Mayo. Intelligence reported it north of the Falklands, and the submarine Splendid was ordered to find and destroy it. By contrast, the submarine Conqueror in the south was ordered only to find and follow a small group led by the cruiser Belgrano.
Continuing passage to an area where the threats are from the cruiser Belgrano, an ancient ex-US Second World warship with no sonar or anti-submarine warfare capability. 2 XL Insomnia-class destroyers, equally decrepit, and an oiler. We picked up some faint signatures of the enemy this afternoon.
From the information that we had, from our knowledge of shipping in the area, there was good reason to assume that it may well be the Argentinian surface group.
You knew that the Belgrano was in that area somewhere?
Yes, we knew that she was in an area which covered several thousand square miles, and that she was in company with a couple of other ships.
1st May. The signatures turned out to be the Argentine surface group, and we closed to around 4,000 yards of them in the forenoon. We caught them right in the middle of a refuel at sea, which would have made a superb target, but unfortunately they're still south of the exclusion zone.
Why didn't you attack it?
Because at that moment our rules of engagement did not allow us to attack vessels outside the exclusion zone.
So what did you do?
We followed her. We informed our HQ at Northwood that we had the surface group visual through our periscope, and we then dropped back to a distance of about 5 miles and followed the group awaiting further instructions.
Sethia says that message was sent to and acknowledged by the submarine headquarters at Northwood in the early afternoon London time on Saturday the 1st of May. Later, the Chief of the Defence Staff, Lord Lewin, was to say it wasn't received until nearer midnight, a discrepancy of some 9 hours. Defence analyst Paul Rogers has been a consistent critic of the government's handling of the Falklands crisis.
Our understanding until now has been that Northwood knew that the Conqueror had spotted the Belgrano very early on the Sunday morning. If we now understand that the information was transmitted to Northwood during the course of the middle part of the Saturday, then this means that London knew for a long time where that cruiser was and its escorts, knew moreover at a time when the task force was actually involved in action against Argentine Air Force units. Yet it appears that even under those conditions, no order was given to sink the Belgrano. If at any time one might argue that it could have been considered a threat, and even that is rather dubious, then it would have been on the Saturday afternoon.
A precise record of when the signal was sent and acknowledged would have been kept in the submarine signals log and control room log. Both logs were later to go missing.
2nd of May. Well, they're not stupid. They spend the night meticulously paralleling the exclusion zone, about 18 miles to the south of it. Frustrating. They're doing about 13 knots and appear to be rambling on quite unconcernedly.
Did their movement suggest that they felt safe?
Yes, definitely. They were not carrying out any anti-submarine evasive manoeuvres, which are fairly standard practice for surface ships who are in a submarine environment.
So it would appear that they assumed what you assumed, which was that they were safe while they were outside the total exclusion zone.
Yes, absolutely.
If the Argentinians needed further reassurance, it came that day from Foreign Secretary Francis Pym in Washington.
What we've done so far in military action is to secure the total exclusion zone, and that we shall go on doing. And we shall go on doing that in all weathers. And there's no other military action envisaged at the moment other than making that secure.
Given what had been published about what was the British intention at that time, do you feel that they were entitled to feel safe?
Yes, I do.
You put in your diary, in fact, that they're skirting the total exclusion zone. It's frustrating.
At the time, obviously, we hadn't been engaged in an action. We had been at sea for nearly a month. And at that time, the feeling was on board, we would hate to have come all the way down here, to have done nothing and to have gone all the way back home again. At that moment, we did want to become involved in some engagement.
By now, the Belgrano was sailing west, away from the task force. The previous evening, a signal from the Argentine flagship, which was later repeated from Commodore Rivadavia, had ordered the group back to home waters. The British War Cabinet said neither of these calls was intercepted. Its critics believe otherwise.
They knew where the Belgrano was going, because as before and as since, every order was intercepted, flashed back to Ascension Island, and then to GC HQ at Cheltenham, where it was decoded. So there was no problem. The boys at Cheltenham did their job very well.
The government has said that it did not know that the Belgrano had been ordered back to port. What evidence do you have that that isn't true?
I know that the orders from the Admiral Walter Ayala at 8:07, recalling the Belgrano to Staten Island, confirmed at 1:19 a.m. on the Sunday morning from the Naval Command in Buenos Aires, were known at Chequers on the Sunday morning.
If the signals were intercepted, they may have been passed to the Conqueror and recorded in her signals or control log. Both logs were later to go missing. But with or without that knowledge, Admiral Lord Lewin went to a War Cabinet meeting on Sunday, May the 2nd, to ask permission to sink the Belgrano. In an informal gathering in the garden at Chequers before lunch, Lewin told the group that the Belgrano posed a threat to the task force.
I personally don't feel that it was a threat. She was an old ship due for retirement, and her two escorts were old ships due doubtless for retirement.
It has also been said separately that it had been announced to the Argentinians that warships that were encountered and which posed a threat would be sunk. Do you think that that in any way applies to the situation?
Had that happened, I'm sure that the commanding officer of any Royal Navy unit would have signalled back to Northwood first and said, look, this thing's a threat. Is it within my authority to engage it? But the situation never arose.
Because there was really no question of it being a threat.
That's correct.
Where was the Belgrano in relation to the task force?
The government has again been chary about telling us exactly where the task force was, but it would appear 250 to 300 miles away from the task force at any time.
And how long would that take to cover that journey?
Even if you assume that the Belgrano could travel at its maximum design speed, which is extremely unlikely, one's talking about 8 to 10 hours.
Nevertheless, in a discussion which the participants say lasted 20 minutes, Lewin was given permission to sink the Belgrano.
It is impossible to discuss such a momentous issue, still less the international legal implications, in 20 minutes. Haphazard and casual.
The Prime Minister has said that she was told that the Belgrano was a threat to the task force, and in those circumstances any politician, any leader of a country would have to take action to defend British servicemen's lives. Is that not a reasonable position to take?
No, because you see, any politician should ask for the latest information and demand to be told it. Now, did she ask, and Lord Lewin never answered this, did the Prime Minister ask what was the latest information about the Belgrano's course, as we know from the leaked documents from the Ministry of Defence, have been going steadily westwards for over 11 hours towards Staten Island?
2nd of May. This afternoon I knew what fear was. At 1400 we received a signal authorising us to sink the Belgrano, even though it was outside the exclusion zone.
The order was given to fire. A torpedo was discharged. A number of seconds later, the order was again given to fire. A weapon was discharged, and a number of seconds later, the order was again given to fire, and a third weapon was discharged. There then elapsed a period of seconds before the first weapon hit its target, at which time an explosion was heard and felt. And shortly after that, another weapon was heard to hit and explode, and at the time we thought that the third one had hit and explode, but this was presumably ammunition stocks on the Belgrano exploding, and it became difficult to differentiate between what was a weapon and what was on-board ammunition exploding. Immediately afterwards, I think it's difficult to say what the feelings were, but the outside, the physical actions and reactions of people were one of jubilation. We had heard the weapons hit, people were cheering and shouting. We had successfully done the job that we set out to do.
On board the Belgrano, 330 sailors are thought to have died in the first 2 explosions, another 38 as the ship went down.
So we ran for about an hour at fairly high speed to manoeuvre away from anybody who may be onto us. And it turned out that one of the escorts was still fairly close to us and giving us some bother. So we went deep again and ran again. It must have been about an hour and a half or 2 hours after the engagement when we finally were able to slow down, return to periscope depth and transmit our signal.
The signal was received at headquarters in Northwood, which later returned a signal saying that the Belgrano had not been sunk but was floating rudderless.
When the Belgrano was hit, one of the accompanying destroyers signalled to its home port that the Belgrano had actually been hit but was still floating. This was certainly intercepted in some way, either directly or indirectly. Now, this signal was sent less than 24 hours after the original recall signal. We know this one was being intercepted. There is at least a very strong assumption that the earlier recall signal was also being intercepted.
We never really thought on the way down that we were actually going to do this. Now I think we're all stunned. The little things in life now seem relatively unimportant as the prospect of death becomes so real. The only consolation, I suppose, is at the end will be cold and quick.
This heavily armed surface attack group was close to the total exclusion zone and was closing on elements of our task force which was only hours away. The threat to the task forces was such that the task force commander could ignore it only at his peril.
John Knott later accepted that the Belgrano had been going away from, not closing, on the task force. But the War Cabinet has maintained that the Belgrano was a threat and that the action successfully confined the enemy's ships to port for the duration.
You've said, basically, that the Belgrano was behaving in a way that made her a sitting duck,
Yes.
frankly. Do you feel that the Argentinians should have been told if there was going to be a change in the rules of engagement?
I would say yes, I think they should have been told. And I think had they been told, it would have been very stupid of them to have stayed in the area.
What was the impact on the Argentinian junta generally of the news that the Belgrano had been sunk?
Well, the meeting, which had been called for the precise purpose of either ratifying or rejecting the proposals, broke up in disarray, in confusion, and there was a great deal of anger. And I think that this kind of mood spilled over into, ordinary Argentine people.
I personally presumed that for some reason unbeknown to us, any peace talks which may have been in progress had broken down, and that therefore the government had decided spontaneously, right, we will change the rules and show them.
There had been no diplomatic breakdown, but the rules were changed anyway. Any Argentine ship would now be a target, and the Conqueror went back to finish off the job.
Well, tonight we close the destroyers, and tomorrow we shall close in for another kill. I can't say I'm looking forward to it. I'm very nervous, particularly as they will be more alert now.
We went back to the area once and found nothing. Again, the possibility was that the ship had been crippled and had limped off to the west to make her way back home. We went back to the area a second time when we heard some surface activity in the area. And we saw that a hospital ship and one of the escorting destroyers were in the area. And we therefore presumed that they were engaged in looking for survivors.
So what did you do?
We left the scene.
42 hours later, Argentinian planes attacked and hit H.M.S. Sheffield, with the loss of 20 British lives.
We were all very stunned and sad. Had we been honest with ourselves, and many people were, we knew that it was our action which had obviously precipitated that. But now that we were in a hostile environment, we became angry, as the Argentinians did against us, and we thought, let's go and get some more.
By that time, the die was obviously cast.
Yes. Yeah.
You see, no Belgrano, no Sheffield, no Antelope, no Arden, no Atlantic Conveyor, no Coventry, no Goose Green, no Bluff Cove. So we're not only concerned with young Argentine sailors, we're no less concerned with many British sailors and soldiers.
9 weeks later, the Conqueror returned to base at Faslane, flying the Jolly Roger. Few questions had been asked about the sinking of the Belgrano until they heard what Commander Rayford Brown had to say.
And I'd been watching her for a few hours beforehand, and under direct orders, I went in and attacked her.
Reputable members of the Scottish Press Corps very properly asked the captain, why did you sink the Belgrano? A question that flowed from John Knott's own statements. And of course, naturally, Commander Rayford Brown replied, I didn't sink the Belgrano on my own bat. I wouldn't do a thing like that. I'm a first-time submarine commander. I did it, he said, on orders from Northwood. Now, that's not what we had been told in the House of Commons. And when there are small inconsistencies, they're often part of larger inconsistencies. Small lies tend to be part of larger lies. And in the most major action since 1945, the first use of a British nuclear submarine, isn't it highly desirable to have the truth?
Tamdale was encouraged in his search for the truth in September last year when a naval officer from the Conqueror came to the House of Commons. He gave him the personal diary of Lieutenant Narendra Sethia.
Mr. Sethia, did you leak your diary to any member of Parliament or to the media?
No, I did not. No.
Was it ever your intention that operational material from your diary should have been made public?
Certainly not, no.
Sethia had intended the diary as the basis for a book and had sent it in confidence to a friend to canvass some publishers. He said he discovered only 3 months ago that the diary, which had been leaked in the press, was his.
I feel very annoyed about it. As I say, it had been my hope that at some stage a book be published based on the diary. But obviously removing anything which I felt was sensitive or classified. Obviously somebody's got there first, and that wasn't to be.
Sethia had told the Ministry of Defence about his diary and received a routine reply. They made no further attempt to contact him until last weekend. 5 days ago, Sethia paid a visit to the Ministry of Defence and later New Scotland Yard to confirm his story. Although Sethia's account answers many questions about the sinking of the Belgrano, it doesn't explain why the War Cabinet decided to sink the ship or whether it knew about the Peruvian peace plan at the time. It doesn't confirm whether the British knew that the ship had been ordered back to home waters, but it does raise the question whether the War Cabinet knew much earlier than has been admitted that the Belgrano was there for the taking. Answers to some of those questions could be in the logbooks of the submarine, but 2 of them are missing. The signals log says the government was routinely shredded within 6 months of the Conqueror's return.
The submarine's navigating officer also kept a control room log which records the latitude and longitude, distance run, course speed and depth of the submarine at hourly intervals together with other routine readings. It has been mislaid, and as it too is classified, a board of inquiry is being held.
Did you take any log from the submarine Conqueror?
No, I did not.
Do you have any information about who took it or where it is?
None whatsoever.
How likely do you in fact think it is that anybody who was on board the submarine took the log?
I think it's extremely unlikely. Every log is accounted for in a log, a separate log. And I just find it very hard to believe that any crew member could have pinched it without somebody realising at the time.
I believe that the information in one form or another is at Hayes and at Northwood and preserved in toto in places well known to ministers in the Ministry of Defence.
Former Defence Secretary John Knott declined to be interviewed. Former member of the War Cabinet Cecil Parkinson also declined. Lord Lewin is giving evidence to a Commons inquiry this week and was unwilling to be interviewed before doing so. Labour MP Tamdale is calling for an independent tribunal of inquiry.
My initial reaction was, well, here is somebody scraping up dirt about the subject to smear the government.
What is your view of that now?
I feel now that perhaps there has been a case for this MP insisting on finding out a little bit more about the event.
Would you personally like the full truth of this experience to come out?
Yes, I would, very much.